What if the institution you cherish the most, the sacred covenant of marriage, is fundamentally hostile to the evolution of the self? What if the very promise of happily ever after is, according to one of history's most terrifying philosophers, simply a prelude to an inevitable and brutal mutual hatred? I am not talking about simple marital discord, or the predictable ennui of familiarity. I am talking about a philosophical time bomb ticking beneath the foundation of your shared life, a profound and necessary conflict between two individuals determined to achieve their ultimate potential. This is the brutal marriage theory of Friedrich Nietzsche, and by the time we are done, you will understand why the pursuit of your greatest self makes you the most dangerous person in your own home. We begin with a simple observation that will flip your understanding of domestic stability. You walk into a social gathering and observe two long-term couples. At one table, we have Anne and Robert. They are a perfectly coordinated unit, finishing each other's sentences, constantly referencing shared goals, demonstrating a flawless fusion of identities. They are the model of successful partnership, the envy of their friends. At another table, there is Eleanor and Victor. They often seem disconnected. Victor is lost in a book, Eleanor sketching quietly. They pursue vastly separate, high-stakes intellectual and creative passions. Their shared time appears minimal, their conversations elliptical and esoteric. Society immediately bets on Anne and Robert to last. They have commitment. They have fusion. They are working toward the same future. But Nietzsche would point to Eleanor and Victor as the only pair with a fighting chance, precisely because they refuse the suffocating demand for fusion. Hold that thought, because what I am about to tell you will redefine what love and resentment actually mean in the modern context. Why does everyone root for the couple that seems indistinguishable from one another? Because the comfortable truth, the societal lie, is that love requires the permanent surrender of ambition for the sake of shared security. We judge Eleanor and Victor because their fierce independence threatens everything we have been taught about domestic success. Carl Jung spent his life defining the shadow aspects of the self. Nietzsche, earlier and more violently, defined the shadow of human nature as the constant, underlying will to power. What he discovered, and what society desperately tries to suppress, is this: marriage is often the primary mechanism designed to crush the will to power, ensuring that neither partner achieves the dangerous, volatile state of self-overcoming, the journey toward the Übermensch. Society does not fear divorce. It fears the philosophical independence that makes the conventional relationship obsolete. It fears the individual who realizes that the person they married 5 years ago is now an anchor, a philosophical obstacle preventing the difficult, necessary, and relentless process of becoming. The truly brutal observation is that the hatred doesn't emerge from external pressures, money or infidelity or boredom. The hatred emerges from internal success. When you genuinely succeed in transforming yourself, in achieving a higher state of consciousness or discipline, your partner, having married the previous, lesser version of you, will eventually hate what you have become. Nietzsche wrote extensively, often brutally, about the institution of marriage, viewing it less as a romantic ideal and more as a social arrangement designed for the propagation of mediocrity. He was deeply concerned with the concept of self-overcoming, the idea that life's greatest imperative is to transcend your current self, to push beyond conventional morality, to constantly revalue all values. This is the brutal engine of the will to power. But this engine requires constant, violent psychological movement. It demands volatility. Marriage, by its very definition, demands stability, predictability, and shared fixed values. When two individuals who have vowed to always be together inevitably change, and they must change, or die philosophically, the space between them becomes poisoned. The meeting of two personalities is, as Jung later suggested, like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when one substance, your spouse, refuses to react to your transformation, insisting instead that you revert to the predictable compound they signed up for? If you have ever felt a profound, aching frustration that your spouse just does not get your latest obsession, your radical shift in perspective, or your desperate need for solitude, this theory is about to give that feeling a terrifying name: philosophical incompatibility, driven by divergent paths of self-overcoming. But let us dig deeper into the mechanism of this hatred. Remember that corrosive, suffocating guilt that arises when you take time for yourself? The guilt of not being productive, of not optimizing every shared moment. Nietzsche saw this guilt as a cultural disease, an internalized mechanism of control. Our obsession with performing domestic partnership, the constant planning, the coordinated vacations, the shared hobbies, isn't about love. It's about proving we are not running away. We perform togetherness because we are terrified of what happens if we stop performing the fixed roles of husband and wife. The Nietzschean individual doesn't feel that guilt. The individual committed to the great health, the ultimate alignment of mind and body in pursuit of higher achievement, prioritizes the inner project above all else. And that is what makes them dangerous to their partner. They are not performing devotion. They are not proving their worth through constant shared motion. They are not even pretending to be content with stagnation. And somehow, this is the part that breaks the marriage. They still have better ideas, clearer visions, and a stronger drive toward their own future than the people who run around in circles of domestic busyness. Nietzsche observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What irritates the conventional spouse about the self-overcoming partner? That the transforming spouse is not playing by the rules of shared mediocrity the system forced them both to follow. That the transforming spouse is not sacrificing their present potential for the comfortable future of joint complacency. That the transforming spouse is not treating their life as a problem to be solved through better time management, but as a perpetual challenge to be overcome through solitary effort. But what if the partner demanding conformity isn't the victim? What if the problem is actually the comfortable, fixed identity they are fighting to protect? Let me show you how this process manifests psychologically, because it explains why your wife will eventually hate you for your profoundest success. The creative mind, the mind driven by the will to power, is infinitely more volatile and less cooperative than the domestic mind demands. Nietzsche demanded a terrifying honesty. He believed the creation of something new is not accomplished by shared effort, but by the highest individual necessity, acting from inner solitude. The creative mind plays with its deepest values. It does not compromise them for convenience. It does not settle. Imagine your mind as a forge. While you are forcing yourself through another grueling work week to afford the bigger house, your unconscious is processing the philosophical meaning of your existence. While your spouse is updating the joint calendar, your brain is solving the problem of what it means to live a life without eternal meaning, thus preparing you for a radical break from inherited values. This silent, internal processing cannot be scheduled. It cannot be optimized. It happens on its own violent timeline. And that is exactly why your transformation generates hatred, because your profoundest growth can't be controlled, can't be managed, and can't be turned into a shared marital activity. Nietzsche believed the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The ambitious spouse has accepted something most people never will, that their personal evolution requires the dissolution of their fixed persona, often including the fixed persona of their relationship. That acceptance gives them access to genuine world-changing ambition, but it also makes them an existential threat to the other person, who desperately relies on the predictability of the past. Now we arrive at the core danger this theory poses, and it's not what you think. This is not about individual relationships. This is about power and societal control. Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe, but the self-overcoming individual isn't struggling against the tribe. They are ignoring the tribe's primary mechanism of subjugation, the conventional marriage, and that is terrifying to anyone who profits from your compliance. Think about it. Our entire system depends on you trading your volatility for stability. You acquire a partner, you acquire debt, you acquire responsibility, and you acquire predictability. The system encourages this domestication because the moment you are fully responsible for a family unit, your capacity for revolutionary, radical self-transformation diminishes. The ambitious individual committed to the will to power looks at this system and asks one simple question: why must my ascent be predicated on shared compromise? The spouse driven by will to power has ambitions without anxiety, dreams without desperation, and ideas without the need to immediately monetize them for the family unit. This makes them unpredictable. Unpredictable people are dangerous to systems that depend on predictability. But here is the deeper fear that haunts the conventional spouse. What if the transforming partner is right? What if ambition without fixed domestic goals is actually more profound? What if dreams pursued from a place of philosophical peace are more likely to manifest than the shared goals pursued from cultural panic? If that is true, then millions of people have been suffering, compromising, and stagnating for nothing. The individual committed to self-overcoming represents living proof that there is another way, a way that doesn't require the constant performance of domestic conformity. Nietzsche observed, "Your vision becomes clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." The transforming spouse is looking inside, and what they see there, a limitless potential, does not match the predictable role society, or their spouse, tells them they should want. This pursuit of the great health, this inner awakening, is the source of the hatred. Carl Jung himself was a perfect example of what happens when society, and domesticity, label someone as dangerously ambitious. His colleagues thought he was wasting his potential. His wife and family often struggled with his intense, necessary periods of solitude and inner exploration. Nietzsche, similarly, rejected most forms of conventional companionship because he understood that the demands of domestic life were the antithesis of the philosophical journey. Jung spent years in what looked like unproductive solitude, exploring the uncharted territories of his mind, developing ideas that seemed to have no practical domestic application. That's exactly what people say about the individual committed to self-overcoming today. Brilliant, but impractical, selfish, and difficult to live with. But here is what Nietzsche knew. He had accepted something terrifying, that his mind worked differently, and that his contributions would come from inner exploration, not external cooperative achievement. And from that acceptance came insights that tore down the foundations of Western morality. The will to power, the concept of the Übermensch, the radical rejection of altruism as a moral absolute, all emerged from what looked like profound selfishness, but was deep, patient, necessary, and individualistic processing. This is the pattern with history's greatest contributors. They appeared antagonistic or neglectful to their contemporaries and partners because they were engaged in a struggle visible only to themselves. The individual striving for the great health is waiting for something. They are not trying to force their dreams through conventional shared methods because they intuitively understand that traditional compliance won't work for the profound creation they are undertaking. They are waiting for the right philosophical moment, the right insight, the right convergence of circumstances that will allow their unconscious vision to manifest in the world. And that waiting, that intense inner focus, looks like coldness, detachment, or, worst of all, laziness to everyone else. It is preparation. It is not compliance. Here is the truth Nietzsche demands we face. The individual pursuing self-overcoming is not broken. They are simply operating under a different, more volatile set of values than the domestic sphere permits. Perhaps you are starting to recognize yourself in this description. Perhaps you are wondering if you are one of those people society, and your spouse, has mislabeled as neglectful or selfish. If so, understanding this truth will fundamentally change how you navigate your closest relationship. First sign of this Nietzschean tension. You feel a crushing need for solitude, not for relaxation but for revaluation. While others seek comfort in company, you seek truth in isolation, because the process of shedding old values requires intense, uninterrupted dialogue with the self. Second sign. Traditional relationship advice, focusing on communication and compromise, makes you feel worse, not better. Every time you try to implement a system designed for stability, you feel like you are fighting against your own existential nature, betraying your highest potential. Third sign. Your intellectual or creative energy comes in bursts that fundamentally disrespect shared schedules. You might be useless at the family dinner table but brilliantly awake at 3 in the morning, solving problems your partner doesn't even know exist. That is not laziness or disrespect. That is your philosophical nature following its own erratic, yet necessary rhythm. Nietzsche would tell you to stop apologizing for your rhythm. He would insist that your different nature is not a bug. It is the essential feature of your greatness. When you stop fighting your nature and start working with it, you gain access to genuine, terrifying ambition, not the desperate, anxious ambition that drives people to perform domestic roles, but the calm, patient ambition that comes from knowing who you are and what you are philosophically capable of. This is why your dreams are so incompatible with shared stability. When you are not exhausting yourself trying to be the person your spouse requires you to be, you have the energy for visions that match your true potential. This is the seed of the eventual hatred. Your confidence seems unearned because it is not based on external shared validation. It is based on your solitary, internal ascent. But accepting this truth about yourself, that you are, and must be, an existential threat to domestic stagnation, that is the hardest part. Now comes the vital question. How do you live as an individual dedicated to the will to power in a world and a marriage that demands constant regression? Nietzsche believed the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But once you accept your nature, you need a strategy. First, stop apologizing for your rhythm. Your periods of intense detachment aren't random, they are information. When you feel the overwhelming urge to withdraw, that is not laziness calling. That is your unconscious mind demanding the space necessary for philosophical revaluation. You must protect that time. Defend it against people who want to fill every moment with shared activity. Second, learn to recognize the difference between self-overcoming and mere selfishness. True self-overcoming feels necessary, often painful, like forging a new identity. Mere selfishness feels anxious, guilty, like running from responsibility. When you are truly transforming, profound insights come. When you are merely avoiding, nothing comes but more existential anxiety. Third, develop what we must call existential patience. This is not passive waiting. It is conscious preparation for when your moment of breakthrough arrives. While your unconscious is processing the great philosophical questions, your conscious mind must be gathering the external resources and building the intellectual skills for when inspiration strikes. Here's the most crucial insight. You must stop measuring your personal evolution by your spouse's timeline. Society wants everything yesterday, neatly packaged into a joint trust fund. The productivity world promises results in 90 days. But Nietzsche understood something deeper. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that journey operates on a monumental timescale. Your true ambitions might take decades to manifest. Your ideas might need years to mature in isolation. Your moment of ascent might not come until you are 60 or 70, and that is not failure. That is the mastery required for philosophical contribution. Every self-overcoming individual in history was told they were wasting their potential or neglecting their duties. Nietzsche's own most profound and revolutionary works emerged from periods of severe isolation and physical difficulty, periods that looked like failure to his contemporaries. His apparent laziness or selfishness turned out to be the necessary preparation for contributions that outlasted all his domestically compliant peers. The moment everyone dismissed him as a solitary oddity, he was actually perfecting the very ideas that would change how the future understood morality and ambition. The same pattern is happening with you right now. The individual everyone dismissed as too difficult or too detached suddenly emerges with something that fundamentally changes everything. Because while everyone else was optimizing their efficiency for a shared domestic life, he was optimizing his authenticity for a singular, philosophical vision. While they were following the rules of togetherness, he was developing his own radical understanding of human potential. While they were performing domestic bliss, he was actually becoming someone worthy of great ambition. Your moment of emergence will come, but it will not look like anyone else's moment. Remember Nietzsche's warning. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. You have been looking inside while everyone else looks outside. You have been awakening while they have been dreaming of conventional shared success. And that awakening gives you something the culture of compromise cannot provide. The ability to live without the desperation of stagnation. Your awakening gives you the ability to achieve ambition without anxiety, to create without forcing, and to pursue truth without fear of the domestic consequences. Your moment won't fit the heroic narrative. It will feel quiet, inevitable, like something that was always meant to happen, regardless of who was standing next to you. The philosophical stars will align. The timing will feel right. The profound idea that has been incubating in isolation will suddenly have a clear path to manifestation. And when that moment comes, all the years of apparent neglect and detachment will reveal themselves as necessary, brutal preparation. Every day you spent in self-overcoming was actually your mind solving existential problems others couldn't even see. Every period of intense solitude was actually your unconscious making the violent, necessary connections that conscious domestic effort would have missed. Society fears the individual committed to self-overcoming because they represent a fundamentally different relationship with time, with success, and with human potential itself. They prove that maybe the problem isn't the individual who needs to compromise for the sake of the relationship. Maybe the problem is a system that pathologizes natural, volatile human evolution and tries to force everyone into the same productive domestic mold. If you are someone who has big, solitary dreams but struggles with the expectations of partnership, if you have ambitions that seem entirely disconnected from your shared actions, if you have been labeled as cold or detached despite having a mind full of possibilities, you are not failing at life. You are operating from a different plane of human potential than society is equipped to recognize. The essential question isn't whether you will achieve your ambitions. The question is whether you will have the existential courage to trust your process long enough to let them emerge, even when your partner begins to hate the person you are becoming. Nietzsche was absolutely right. Your vision becomes clear only when you look into your heart. And sometimes the most ambitious thing you can do is trust the terrifying, solitary truth you find there, even when the rest of the world cannot see it yet. The individual committed to self-overcoming is not society's problem. He is society's possibility, and that is exactly why they fear him. If this analysis resonated with the deep philosophical tension you feel in your own life, I demand you face this truth immediately. Today, right now, define the struggle. In the comments, write this exact phrase: "The self is a volatile future." This statement forces you to internalize the truth we have discussed. The universe rewards action, and your comment solidifies this uncomfortable knowledge. Also, affirm your commitment to this journey by hitting the like button and subscribing. We are building a community here dedicated to radical, difficult truths about human nature and success, and you need to be part of the ascent. Next, we will dismantle the 3 specific romantic vows that Nietzsche identified as the guaranteed formulas for mutual hatred, and why those vows transform your wife into your most philosophical obstacle. That revelation will utterly change how you view commitment forever. Stay tuned. We have established that society's fear of the lazy, ambitious man is not rooted in his perceived lack of action, but in the terrifying possibility that his apparent inaction is actually superior action. This man, operating outside the frantic, visible metrics of productivity culture, demonstrates an uncomfortable truth: that the exhausting race most of us run is merely a performance designed to manage the shadow, the deep-seated fear of being worthless. But the lazy, ambitious man, the one Carl Jung studied intensely, has already moved beyond this fundamental fear. He has accepted his nature, a nature that refuses to submit to the tyranny of the clock. Now, we must dissect the brutal mechanisms by which the system fights back against this liberation, and how that refusal to conform creates an irreconcilable fissure in the most intimate of human bonds, including marriage. The collective cultural anxiety around visible output is not accidental. It is the sacred mechanism that upholds the established order. What if I told you that the entire edifice of modern capitalism, the corporate ladder, and the obsessive culture of self-optimization rests entirely on the performance of struggle? Not actual success, but the demonstration of effort. The system doesn't necessarily need you to win, it needs you to be busy trying. Consider the overwhelming emphasis on time management. Every calendar notification, every task checklist, every 5 a.m. routine celebrated on social media serves one ultimate master: predictability. Predictability allows for planning, for resource allocation, and for the efficient extraction of value. Society praises the workaholic, not just for the output, but because his schedule is legible. He is a measurable unit in the economic machine. He is reliable. His effort is visible and quantifiable. The lazy, ambitious man is the antithesis of this legibility. His genius is opaque. His process is internal. He might produce a revolutionary idea in one focused afternoon, after 3 days of what looks like deep philosophical staring into the middle distance. This rhythm terrifies the system because it is uncontrollable and, crucially, unscalable. You cannot build a corporation on unscalable genius. You cannot implement a quarterly review around unconscious processing. The lazy ambitious man, or the lamb, stands as a living, breathing paradox, a source of immense potential that refuses to trade its unique rhythm for predictable compensation. This is where the collective projection of resentment begins to burn. When we see the lamb succeeding, when his seemingly effortless insight shatters the brittle structure built by tireless effort, it doesn't inspire admiration. It evokes fury. It forces the question, was my struggle pointless? Was my sacrifice, the missed evenings, the anxiety-driven weekends, the perpetual exhaustion, a meaningless price paid to appease a shadow? This internal conflict, this confrontation with personal servitude, is the source of society's relentless need to label him lazy, thereby safely dismissing his method and preserving the sanctity of the grind. But to truly understand the depth of this conflict, we must move beyond the coffee shop and the boardroom and step into the private sphere where these contradictions become lethal, the relational dynamic. The central conflict of the lazy, ambitious man is the war between his inner necessity and the external expectations of a shared life. A conventional marriage, the kind society champions as the ultimate goal, is built upon a profound contract of mutual predictability. It relies on synchronized routines, shared metrics of success, a tidy home, a rising income, scheduled social engagements, and a common rhythm. The wife, often representing the stabilizing force of collective societal expectations, grounds the volatile potential of the man in measurable reality. However, the lamb cannot maintain this predictable rhythm because his productivity is driven entirely by intrinsic motivation and the demands of his unconscious processing. His greatest work occurs during periods of apparent inactivity, during what his partner might perceive as reckless self-indulgence or irresponsible procrastination. Imagine the domestic scene. While the partner, steeped in the productivity ethic, sees the life as a series of problems to be solved, the mortgage, the grocery list, the children's schedule, the lamb sees it as a field for radical, internal exploration. His mind is engaged in what Jung called the play instinct, actively synthesizing vast quantities of information, yet externally, he might be motionless. He is present, but unavailable. He is thinking world-changing thoughts, but cannot be relied upon to take out the trash on time. This disconnect is not a minor incompatibility. It is a fundamental clash of existential realities. The wife, seeing the world through the lens of performance and measurable effort, views the man's inactivity as a moral failing. His refusal to engage in the performance of being busy is interpreted as a lack of care, a lack of respect, or worse, a deliberate withholding of effort from the shared life. Jung noted that the acceptance of one's own nature is the most terrifying thing. For the lamb, this means accepting a genius that is fundamentally antisocial and anti-scheduled. For the wife, this translates into living with a partner who perpetually breaks the unspoken contract of shared sacrifice. Her constant, exhausting effort, the emotional labor, the administrative burden of the household, the visible grind of maintaining stability, is implicitly invalidated by his effortless bursts of brilliance. He has ideas without anxiety. She has effort driven by desperation. The ambition she respects requires struggle. The ambition he practices requires stillness. And as the years pass, the stillness begins to look like contempt. The wife begins to hate the man, not because he is a failure, but because his unique success proves that her predictable struggle was unnecessary. He forces her to confront her own shadow, the anxiety that dictates her actions, and no one loves the mirror that shows them their servitude. The lazy, ambitious man is engaged in a mode of deep work that is misunderstood by the superficial metrics of the modern era. We must dig deeper into the mechanics of this inner play that Jung described, the engine that powers the lamb. The productivity culture of today is entirely focused on conscious effort, which primarily uses the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that manages logic, schedule, and immediate execution. This is sequential, linear thinking. It is excellent for updating a LinkedIn profile or color-coding a planner. However, it is fundamentally incapable of true creative synthesis, the kind of leaps required for revolutionary ideas. The lamb, by refusing to constantly engage in the performance of conscious effort, is optimizing for a different state, the default mode network, DMN. This is the brain's resting state, the state of mind wandering, daydreaming, or just staring out the window. It is during these periods of apparent idleness that the brain is at its most active for complex problem solving. It is connecting disparate memories, synthesizing seemingly unrelated pieces of data, and building novel structures far below the surface of conscious thought. While others are frantically filling their calendars, the Lamb is allowing his DMN to run massive, parallel processing experiments. He is incubating. He is playing. He is allowing the inner necessity to guide the timing of his insights. This is why his ideas appear to come from nowhere. They are the emergent result of complex subterranean processing that demands long stretches of non-forced engagement. Think of the difference between dredging a river, conscious effort, hard labor, predictable results, and waiting for an artesian well to burst forth, unconscious incubation, stillness, unpredictable but potent flow. Society demands dredging. The Lamb waits for the well. This waiting, this active patience, is the core of his perceived laziness. But it requires immense mental discipline, the courage to resist the cultural mandate to do something. It is a deep psychological trust in his own process, a trust that conventional anxious ambition cannot fathom. So, where are you watching this analysis from? Are you in a city where the grind is celebrated? I want you to anchor this understanding to the specific geography of your struggle. The conflict between the lazy, ambitious man and the world is ultimately a conflict between authenticity and conformity. The world, and by extension the life partner, wants conformity, a stable, measurable reality. The Lamb insists on authenticity, a chaotic internal rhythm dictated by the demands of his genius. The deeper hatred, the ultimate reason why the wife eventually despises the Lamb, is that he never truly needed to be saved, managed, or fixed. His apparent flaws, his tardiness, his erratic schedule, his moments of detachment, were not weaknesses to be overcome, but rather the necessary conditions for his success. She dedicated her life to trying to force him into a functional mold, believing she was helping him reach his potential. Instead, she realizes he was already operating at a higher potential, and all her effort was simply an attempt to drag him down to the predictable level of the masses. This revelation creates a terminal crisis of meaning in the relationship. She sacrificed her own inner needs for the sake of a shared, stable external reality. He protected his inner life at all costs, resulting in a breakthrough that validates his method and invalidates hers. The brutal genius of Nietzsche's theory, when adapted to this Jungian framework, is the understanding that true individual ascent requires a tragic, inevitable severance from the predictable comforts of the herd, even when the herd is represented by the person you love most. His liberation is her betrayal. But what if you are the lazy, ambitious man? What if you recognize this rhythm in yourself? You are constantly fighting the guilt, trying to impose external systems onto an internal process that resists management. Jung's lesson here is vital. Stop fighting your nature. Your inability to sustain the frantic pace of the collective is not a defect. It is a prerequisite for your unique contribution. You must learn to defend your periods of incubation against all comers, especially those who love you but fear your unpredictability. This requires a radical acceptance of the fact that your timeline will never match the world's expectations. Your success might not appear until the world is finally ready for the depth of your thinking. Until then, the pressure to perform productivity will continue to mount, amplified by every external validation metric the system provides. We have only scratched the surface of how this unique psychology manifests in the real world and, crucially, what happens when the Lamb finally steps out of his incubation period and his vision begins to manifest. The world is prepared to dismiss his laziness, but it is utterly unprepared for the terrifying power of his realized ambition. The final consequence of this profound individuality is a force that shatters not only personal relationships, but the very nature of conventional success itself. Now, as you sit with this difficult truth, I want you to take action that validates the power of this understanding. We are building a community that values authenticity over performance. In the comments below, let us define our quiet revolution. Share one word or a short phrase that perfectly captures the internal feeling of the active patience, that space between apparent laziness and imminent genius. Do not allow the system to define your potential. Join this intellectual revolution right now. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and smash the like button to signal your commitment to thinking differently about success. The next insight we unlock will reveal the necessary, terrifying action you must take when your moment of breakthrough finally arrives, and why accepting that destiny is the hardest yet most rewarding path you will ever choose. You must prepare to embrace the coming shift. What if I told you that the hatred which eventually settles into the marrow of a long marriage is not the result of infidelity, miscommunication, or financial strain? What if the brutal truth, according to Friedrich Nietzsche, is that the hatred is the result of a profound existential betrayal committed not against your partner, but against the promise of who you were supposed to become? The man your wife married was a horizon, a future possibility, a vessel overflowing with unproven, terrifying potential. The man she now shares a silent breakfast with is a monument to limitation, a comfortable statue of the self he failed to transcend. The ultimate tragedy of the Nietzschean marriage is this: the wife hates you because you are a failed prophecy. You promised fire and delivered ashes. Before we descend into this final, uncompromising abyss of self-examination, I must know where this profound truth is finding you. Are you watching from the quiet anonymity of the rolling hills of Rome, or the desperate, relentless hustle of São Paulo? Tell me the name of the city you are in right now, because the realization of this existential horror is universal, regardless of the postal code. This is not the hatred of petty grievance. This is the pure, white-hot fury of two souls realizing they have irrevocably compromised their destiny for a shared mediocrity. We arrive now at the climax of Nietzsche's brutal theorem. The slow, creeping venom that turns devotion into loathing is the recognition that the partner has stopped climbing. Nietzsche understood that the core dynamic of a vibrant spiritual relationship, the relationship that does not succumb to the decay of contempt, must be based on the shared worship of the potential. Love, in this context, is the mutual appreciation of the Übermensch that the other person is striving to become. But what happens when the striving stops? The moment the husband chooses comfort over chaos, routine over risk, and predictable happiness over the terrifying freedom of self-overcoming, that is the exact moment the seed of permanent contempt is planted. Your wife married a potential god. She is now living with a domesticated animal, and she hates you not for your flaws, but for your acceptance of them. She sees in your comfortable inertia the reflection of her own stalled journey. You are the mirror that confirms her greatest fear, that she too has settled. This is the great defining moment where Nietzsche's philosophy rips conventional relationship advice apart. The popular culture tells you to cherish your flaws, to accept where you are, to find peace in your routine. Nietzsche screams that this peace is spiritual death. The commitment to a lifetime together becomes tolerable only if that lifetime is a shared ascent toward a peak that is constantly shifting higher. The moment the summit becomes visible, the moment you decide you have made it, the descent into mutual disdain begins. Your wife eventually hates you because you killed the part of yourself that thrilled her, the unpredictable, dangerous, hungry part that was willing to risk everything to become more than merely human. She does not hate the man who forgets to take out the trash. She hates the man who forgot his own essential nature, the man who decided that the easy, secure path was worth the eternal sacrifice of his soul. That is the betrayal that cannot be forgiven, because it is a betrayal of the spiritual contract underlying the marriage itself. But there is a final horrifying test that Nietzsche proposes, one that ensures the hatred, if it exists, is justified beyond doubt: the concept of eternal recurrence. Imagine the most terrifying demon appearing to you in your loneliest hour and whispering this truth: you must live this life precisely as you have lived it, including this marriage, including every mundane morning, every petty argument, every silent disappointment, an infinite number of times. Not a single detail will change. Now apply this test to your marriage. Would the wife, faced with the decree that she must relive every moment with the man you are right now, forever, collapse in despair, screaming against the cruelty of the universe? Or would she fall to her knees in ecstatic joy, declaring that every moment, even the pain, was necessary and magnificent? The hatred, the final and definitive hatred, arises when the answer is utter despair. If the man you are cannot withstand the test of eternal recurrence, if he is so mediocre, so compromised, so lacking in spiritual substance that the thought of repeating a single day with him drives his partner to existential dread, then the hatred is not merely deserved. It is a vital existential signal. It is the universe telling you, through the eyes of the person closest to you, that you have failed the ultimate task of human existence, to live a life worthy of eternal repetition. The lazy man fears work. The mediocre man fears the eternal recurrence, and the wife who eventually hates her husband sees him as the anchor dragging her soul into that infinite, tedious repetition. She realizes that her life has been bound not to a fellow climber, but to a comfortable, predictable obstacle. So how does the Nietzschean man survive this brutal reckoning? He doesn't. The man who existed before the hatred must die, consumed by the flames of his wife's contempt. The hatred must be embraced as the necessary spiritual sandpaper. Nietzsche suggests the only marriage worth surviving is the one that becomes a bridge, not a safe shore. He wrote that marriage should be the will of two people to create that one person who is more than those who brought him forth. A focus not merely on progeny, but on the co-creation of higher values and shared philosophical assent. The true Nietzschean marriage is a lifelong collaborative project focused on the future self of both partners. It means viewing your partner's criticism, their dissatisfaction, and yes, their eventual cold contempt, not as personal attacks, but as precise navigational feedback guiding you away from the shallow waters of mediocrity. If your wife hates you, it is because she is holding the mirror of your potential. The man who overcomes this hatred is the one who stops defending the pathetic version of himself and commits, with brutal honesty, to becoming the man she once dared to imagine. That is the only repentance possible. This transformation must be internal, ruthless, and complete. It requires the dissolution of the conventional ego, the ego that seeks comfort, validation, and ease, and the forging of a self designed for struggle, danger, and persistent growth. The tragedy for the vast majority is that they mistake their partner's hatred for a relationship problem, instead of recognizing it as a symptom of an existential crisis in their own soul. They seek therapy, communication tips, or external changes, when the only viable solution is the complete internal revolution of the self. Nietzsche's brutal marriage theory offers a terrifying freedom. Your partner's contempt is proof that you still have potential to realize, and that the stakes of your existence are infinitely higher than you previously assumed. The ultimate conclusion is inescapable. You must become the kind of man whose life, repeated eternally, would evoke a profound yes from your partner. You must become the kind of man whose self-mastery elevates the entire spiritual landscape of the relationship. Until then, you are merely delaying the inevitable existential reckoning. This theory demands radical honesty, a commitment to perpetual self-overcoming, and the courage to look into the abyss of your own compromises. We ask you to embrace this truth, to internalize this philosophy, and to declare your intention to rise above the mediocrity that breeds contempt. I am asking you, the few who dare to look honestly at the abyss, to prove you understand this necessary transformation. In the comments right now, affirm your commitment to the painful path by writing this single powerful phrase: I am the abyss I stare into. We are building a community of individuals committed to this challenging ascent, those willing to confront the most brutal truths without flinching. This journey of transformation is not meant to be traveled alone, and embracing this darkness together is how we find the true light. Join us in this quest for authenticity. Take the next critical step toward self-mastery right now. Subscribe to this channel. This subscription is your immediate and public declaration that comfort is dead and the quest for the higher self has begun. And because these truths challenge everything society tells you about happiness and safety, the system tries to bury them. Like this video immediately. Your affirmation ensures this message reaches others who are trapped in the mundane cycle of mutual disappointment and need this terrifying catalyst for change. We stand against the soft lie of comfortable living. The journey continues far beyond this single idea. There are deeper, more confronting truths waiting to be uncovered, secrets about human nature that will shatter your remaining illusions about ambition, freedom, and power. Do not risk missing the next crucial revelation that defines true self-mastery. We have prepared an exploration that will fundamentally rewire your understanding of what drives the truly great. Do not delay your awakening. The next step is waiting.